Okay, next question. Why do you think racial consciousness matters in policing or in any other matter? If racial consciousness does matter in certain scenarios, what makes it not matter in others? How do we both logically and fairly make that distinction? Okay, so I think this person is probably referring to something I've probably said somewhere about racial diversity being important in a police force. If I'm in general pro colorblindness as a principle, how come I would violate that in the case of a police force looking at race, its racial diversity, and therefore looking at the race of individual officers as looking at its overall racial composition, caring about its overall racial composition? How do I square that circle? So what I would say is, insofar as the racial composition of an institution has a direct relationship to the perceived legitimacy of an important state institution, or put another way, where a lack of diversity will directly limit the ability of an institution to do an important job. In those cases, it makes sense to care about the racial composition of an institution. So, for example, imagine that the entire NYPD were white. They were just to a man white people policing a city that is heavily non-white. Given what race relations are in this country, and given the history of America and how race resonates with people, it's going to be more difficult for the police to be seen as having a legitimate on the monopoly of violence. You know, when people in the Black and Hispanic community are looking and seeing every cop is white, what it becomes is it just begins to feel like the dynamic of a colonial enterprise. It begins to feel like you are being policed by people that are fundamentally unlike you and do not have your best interests at heart. And that's a problem, because if the police are just seen as totally illegitimate, it makes it impossible for them to do their jobs. And that becomes a problem for everyone. It becomes a problem in particular for people in communities where there is violence that goes unpoliced, where there are murders that routinely go unsolved, and kids who don't get the privilege of growing up in a safe environment. And so, you know, the police are, I think, a clear example where the racial composition of a police force directly affects the ability of the police to do its job. Now, it's worth stating that, you know, most enterprises are not like this. I mean, I think the average profit-seeking company overstates how crucial racial diversity is to making money in whatever enterprise it's doing. And, you know, diversity has become one of these unchallengeable values. Nevertheless, I think there are areas where racial diversity actually makes a difference and is crucial. And I would say policing is one of those. If you want to have any kind of stop and frisk program and it's only white cops stopping and frisking Black boys, I mean, the picture just looks like Jim Crow, right? And I think that PR problem becomes an actual problem because the police can no longer do their jobs. They're just not seen as legitimate. I think policing is a job that requires a high level of trust between the police and the community. And this is something that has not always been appreciated, I think. Policing is a job you can't just do with brawn and training, right? Even well-trained cops that don't do anything illegal, play by the rules, and so forth, they really can't do all that much if no one in the community admires and respects them and trusts them. Like when you're trying to solve a murder, all you have is the intel, sometimes at least, is the intel you can gather from people close to the situation, right? If you're in a situation where nobody snitches because nobody trusts the police, partly because there's no diversity there, then it just becomes impossible to do that job. So I think most situations in life are not like this, but the police is certainly one. Okay. All right, next question. How do you have the discipline to read works that you feel are either intellectually dishonest or incoherent? I want to read and listen to people who have the opposite positions on issues to mine, but I have a hard time staying tuned in when I hear them make false equivalencies and ad hominem attacks. I guess I would ask, what exactly are you feeling when you're reading and listening to people you disagree with that's making it hard for you to persist? Is it that you get angry when they say something you think is dumb, or you get irritated and put the book down in favor of doing something that doesn't make you irritated? I can imagine that. That is an emotion I felt too many times to count. I mean, one practical suggestion I would have is, whether you're reading a physical book or Kindle, just make marginal notes on everything that you find irritating, right? When you come across the sentence that just pisses you off because of how wrong it seems to you, highlight it and begin writing why you think it's wrong. Pinpoint what's wrong with it. Is it that they got a fact wrong? Is it that their logic is wrong? Is it that their belief is internally contradictory? Is it that their belief is consistent but would lead to horrible things in the world if adopted? What I find usually is, once I pinpoint why I disagree with something, whatever anger I had upon reading it melts away, because I found a kind of satisfaction in the clarity that I've been able to achieve by pinpointing why I find it wrong. Like, you can learn a lot about what you think and why you think it by reading things you disagree with and pinpointing exactly why you disagree with them. So that's what I would recommend. This is something I like everyone, I think I enjoy reading something that I love more than I enjoy reading something I hate. But I have found a way to read things I dislike with a certain level of charity, while getting satisfaction out of writing in the marginal notes or on my Kindle why I disagree with something. So I recommend that. Okay, next question. Terms defining damnable behaviors, such as racist, misogynist, or fascist, used by the left, or communist, anarchist, and evil, used by the right, are thrown around like hand grenades today. Do you think this causes them to lose their meaning? And if so, is there an appropriate way to counter their overuse without defending those who truly espouse such beliefs? So the short answer is yes, I do think the overuse, and in particular the misapplication of any of these words, diminishes their impact. If you use the word racist to describe someone like Joe Rogan, or, if you use the word racist to describe someone like Mike Pesca or Don McNeil, if you use the word racist to characterize tens and tens of millions of people who say vote Republican, if you use the word racist to describe every Republican candidate in my lifetime, for president at least, well, yes, then it doesn't smack most people as true in many of those cases. And because of that, it loses some of its power to shame actual racism. Right? Like, these words only have power insofar as people genuinely feel the appropriate reaction upon hearing the word, right? Like, when I was a kid and I had no reason yet to suspect that anyone would cynically accuse someone of being a racist when they actually weren't. Back in those naive days, if I heard someone call someone else a racist, all my alarm bells would go on. I'd say, oh my God, so this person is a racist. That is extremely important. It is, I'm inclined to believe it. And if it's true, that is a huge deal. Right? It's like if someone calls someone else a pedophile, like, that word hasn't been so overused, right? So if I hear that someone was a pedophile, I have the appropriate reaction, right? Because it's a word that's retained its power. With the word racist, by the time I got to a certain age in life, I had heard it used and misused so many times that my instinctive reaction to it began to change. Like, if you've heard the word racist applied more often where it shouldn't be applied than where it should, your mental heuristic for how you react to an accusation of racism is going to be informed by that experience, right? The moment you hear it, you're going to be thinking, you know what? It's probably another fake accusation of racism. It's probably another misapplication. And that's what it is for a word to lose its power, is that it doesn't elicit the appropriate reaction when used because it's been misused almost more than it's been used correctly. And everything I just said was a very complicated and long-winded way of saying that the boy who cried wolf effect is real. We've all known it ever since we heard that story as kids, and yet many people seem to have forgotten it. I mean, another way that you can make this point vivid is two examples in history where cynical accusations of say, racism or communism, to take an example of the opposite political persuasion, have led to really regrettable outcomes. And I think McCarthyism, having the notion and history of McCarthyism in your toolkit as an example where false accusations of something led to horrible consequences is a very useful one. There's another one that is lesser known, but has always been fascinating to me, which is Lysenkoism and the Lysenko affair. And just to give a brief summary of this, in the Soviet Union, there was a scientist named Trofim Lysenko who believed that you could turn one plant species into another. He didn't believe in Mendelian genetics. He had all kinds of quack claims and quack theories about how you could boost Soviet agriculture. But the basic picture is he was completely wrong. He was a fraud. He claimed to be able to turn certain trees into other trees. And yet his version of plant science became the official doctrine of the Soviet Union. And it's just a very interesting episode from history to see how the hell a nation that was really on the forefront of many other sciences like physics, how could they possibly have made something so absurd official state doctrine and actually implemented it when everyone in the world knew that plants passed on their genes and that is fundamental to understanding agriculture? And one way that this happened was right after Nazism was defeated, and anything to do with genes and genetics had a connotation of racism and fascism. So if you look back at the arguments Russian Soviet scientists were having, it was just a clusterfuck of accusations of racism and fascism. It's like Lysenko was accusing every scientist who disagreed with him of being a Nazi. And it worked. I mean, that wasn't the only reason he won, but it was a major feature of the battles between Soviet scientists at that time. And this is just a lesser known example from history. Obviously, an understandable overreaction to Nazism led to absolute absurdities and to real harm. So having these examples like McCarthyism and Lysenkoism from history is a really useful kind of landmark for understanding and not repeating those kinds of hysterias in the present.